Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I am your host, Paige Fullman. And oh my goodness, have I missed gabbing. This last month has been insane with just the news, which we will get into. But in my personal races in Illinois 9, and then the Senate race, it's been heating up. What else did I do in this past month that I've been missing? I got kicked out, I guess, of the Northfield Township Democrats, got in a fight with their lawyer, ? I don't know. If you'd like to learn more about that, I posted a video about it on TikTok and Instagram. So that was crazy. Mike Kreloff, if you're listening to this, kick rocks. What else happened? We had 4 great episodes come out in January from different candidates, so I hope you guys liked those and enjoyed those. On the day I'm recording this, it is Thursday, February 5th, the Girl I Guess voting guide came out, so that was exciting, and a bunch of the candidates from Illinois that I've had on were endorsed by the guide, so that's awesome. Here at Current Affairs Unfiltered, we choose winners, okay? We only bring the winners on. I also launched my Substack. I guess I'm 3 articles in at this point, and that's been super fun. Flexing my writing muscles, which I haven't done since I got my master's degree and was back in school. So that's been super fun and exciting. As always, that's going to be in the show notes. So you guys can go subscribe to that. I also had a video go viral on Instagram and TikTok. That hit a nerve so much that it went viral on both platforms. It was about us kidnapping Maduro, which we will get into again. And I think that's it. In Illinois, we are very, very close to primaries. In Texas, they're even closer. Texas and Arkansas, I think, and there might be one other state that has primaries on March 3rd, and then Illinois' primaries March 17th. So those are sneaking up. We're 6 weeks away in Illinois and 4 in Texas and Arkansas? That's crazy. What else? Any other housekeeping things? Let's see. In March, we will be doing 3 guest episodes in a row because I will be going to Dubai to visit a friend, which will be super fun. But I don't want to have to feel like I have to record a solo episode that by the time it comes out, it's going to be out of date because I'm going on some weird days that wouldn't line up with recording. So we're going to do 3 guest episodes in a row for March and then end with solo. And otherwise, that's it. January's been crazy on a personal political level, and it's been crazy in a news level. So I think that's it. Let's just jump right into it. And because this is going to be my last solo episode after a candidate month, it's going to be a lot of overview because somehow I feel like January was the worst possible month for me to do candidate month because it feels like so much happened and I didn't really have an outlet for it except for on Instagram and TikTok, which was nice. It was super nice to feel like I had to make my own content about stuff because I couldn't talk about it on here. But yeah, if you want to go back and watch some of those because that was my only outlet while candidate month was going on, but such is life. Yeah, so today we're going to just take stock of some of the most explosive developments that are happening on the national and global stage over the last month. From Venezuela to state violence that we're seeing at home, Epstein files, all the big stuff. So let's jump right into it. Let's start with Venezuela. Now, the last time I recorded a solo episode and put one out was late December. And I believe in that last solo episode, I had talked about the bombing of the drug boats and how that was so silly because it clearly was not to stop the drugs, whatever. We're past that at this point because things very quickly spiraled out of control. In late December, there was an oil tanker that the U.S. took over, and there was an oil tanker that had a Russian flag painted on the side kind of haphazardly. Things were not going well. And then this all culminated on January 3rd, where let me give it to you from my point of view, because I went to sleep on January 2nd pretty late, it was probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was starting to get the headlines at that point of bombs going off in Venezuela. And I kind of was just not that this is any better, but I was okay, we're going to war, there's going to be the war declaration, troops will be sent there, whatever, classic American imperialism post-World War II. I go to sleep because I'm this is nothing to stay up over. I wake up the next morning And the first headline on my phone is from CNN, and it says, Maduro captured by U.S. forces. And I was like, huh, that's weird. Then I get all the story about Maduro and his wife being captured. U.S. forces snuck into the presidential home, took Maduro and his wife, brought him to the U.S. because he was indicted years ago, I think, by the Biden administration, and is now standing trial in the U.S. So let's make that even shorter and simpler. U.S. forces captured the leader of a foreign country, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores, brought them back to the United States to stand trial. Then there was that whole thing where for like a week, it was a whole will they, won't they, what are we going to do with Venezuela? This is where my viral video came in, okay? Because right after Maduro was captured, is the word I'm going to use, there was a lot of discourse of people being like, wait, like, hold on, this is a bad thing. And then there were the people, mostly on the right, that were like, oh, it's to stop the drugs. It was a fantastic thing. He's a dictator, da 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 da. Anyways, my whole point in the video, and I think this still stands true now, is that people that are saying this is a bad thing, and it's a month has passed, I'm still going to say that was a bad thing to do. People that are saying it was a bad thing are not pro-Maduro, because Maduro was objectively a bad guy. He was a dictator and generally just, not a very good leader. The opposition about capturing Maduro is about what comes next, because what people were opposing is this imperialist U.S. takeover of Venezuela. And I believe, based on the fact that, Maduro's gone and suddenly we're not bombing boats off the coast of Venezuela, I think it's safe to say that it was about the oil. Because crazy, you get the oil fields and all of a sudden drug boats disappear, huh? Weird. The other crazy part about that whole saga is that then there was questions about like who should be in charge. And the obvious choice to most people looking on was the opposition leader who was in exile from the country, who is Maria Corina Machado. She is in exile and she was like, I am ready. If you recall, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump was all sorts of pissed about that. We'll get into that in a couple of minutes. I'm trying to do this as like chronologically as I can, but there's just so much that goes into this that I'm not sure how possible that is. Anyways, so everybody was kind of like, oh, like Maria Machado should obviously take over. She won the last election, but like didn't because Maduro rigged it. Duh. Then Trump was like, no, we're going to hand it over to Delcy Rodriguez, who is Maduro's vice president. Delcy Rodriguez was like, the hell? I don't want to be president. My president is still president. My president, Nicolás Maduro, is still president. He's just in the U.S. because you stole him. Anyways, Delcy Rodriguez, I guess, reluctantly took over power and is now the leader of Venezuela. Then there was the whole back and forth about Donald Trump being like, oh, we're going to take it over. Take it over? For how long? Until when? No updates, quite honestly. Like, Trump said we're going to take it over, and there hasn't been much else of a development. Although, like I said before, no more bombing boats, because guess what? It was never about the drugs. They are trying, like, what are they going to say? That the U.S. took over Venezuela and all of a sudden there were no drug boats ever? Be serious. Anyways, then this leads into my next little tidbit. Peace Prize drama. Everybody knows Trump was all pissed off because he didn't win the Peace Prize. So Maria Machado, I believe, in a bid to get him to install her as president, gives Trump her Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee then had to release a statement saying, hey, just because you give your Peace Prize to somebody doesn't make them the winner. Hope, just so everybody's clear on that. That happens. Then, big story here. Do you know the only two people that have ever been given a secondhand Peace Prize? That would be propaganda minister of the German Nazis, Joseph Goebbels, and Donald Trump. Those are the two people that have received a secondhand Nobel Prize. I don't think that that's anything to be celebrating. So, anyways, that is that on that. But as for Maduro and his wife, they appeared in court like shortly after we extradited them to the United States. He was clearly confused at the court proceedings, which was kind of sad. I mean, whatever. But he hired a kind of kick-ass lawyer, to be quite honest. So we'll see where this goes. But at the end of the day, supporters of this are framing it as this big blow to narco trafficking, which we all know is not true because Trump pardoned a famed narco terrorist, I don't know, a few months ago. And also the drug boat bombing stopped. And critics are saying it's a dangerous breach of international law with major implications for global order. Do we not remember all the other regime changes that we performed? Sorry, I'd love to know the person who pitched this and was like, well, okay, you know what? The whole administration, anybody in the government right now that is joining because of Trump or is a Trump appointee are suffering in like a case of mass groupthink. So let's start there. Let's start with that assumption. Who was the poor sucker that stood up and was like, I promise that this regime change will work. This is the one. Sorry, the other 20 didn't work. Like, whatever. I can't beat this horse anymore. So let's move on to the other side of the world. Let's go to Iran. Iran had a massive and deadly crackdown on protesters. Starting in late December, early January, there were mass anti-government protests that started erupting, and like they were huge. Like these protests were huge, and the crackdown was very swift and harsh. They ended up cutting the internet out for a long time. And for a while, the only bits and pieces that people were getting out were like, if they had Wi-Fi for like 30 seconds to send a picture or a video out. And at the beginning, when it started to make international news, Donald Trump comes out and says, in the most hypocritical fashion, that Iran better not touch their protesters because you can't harm peaceful protesters. I want you to think about that for a second. Even Trump supporters that I know, former Trump voters, were like, hey, that's ironic. I'm like, you don't say? So Trump said that. And then there was this brief period where the Iranian protests were like at the top of all news coverage. And Trump was saying that he was debating about whether to go in. And he had essentially said as much in saying that, you know, if Iran touches their protesters, you know, they're going to have something to worry about, whatever weird Trumpism he used. That's how he said it. Then Trump never did anything. It kind of fell out of the top of U.S. news stories as news cycles do. And that was it. Trump never did anything. Iran has killed at this point. At this point, it's estimates because they're never going to give us a real number, but estimates are saying into the tens of thousands of Iranians. There's been a few U.S. news publications that have done stories on a few people that have been confirmed killed. And I don't really have anything else to say except that it's horrible. The Iranian people deserve to choose their own government. If they are unhappy with the government they have now, their leader should be a decent person. I understand that he is not a decent person, but we should be on the side of all people that are fighting against oppression, which the Iranian people are. And given the way that if you are in the US, the way that we are raised is to think that protesting is our right. And even though I understand that other countries don't have the same rules and protections that we do, it doesn't make me feel any less about my right to protest. I think all people and all countries should have the right to protest without fear of death, quite frankly. And also, I don't really think that Donald Trump's comments about saying, you know, if you touch protesters, you're going to have hell to pay, I don't think that really did anything. And at this point, because it's fallen out of U.S. news sources, that makes me a bad journalist, I guess, for not checking other places. But because it's fallen out of U.S. news sources, like, there's not a lot of information about, like, what's gone on since then. There's been a couple, like I said, there's been a couple of follow-up articles about people that have died and just kind of the aftermath of it. But, like, are these protests still happening? Like, what are we doing here? Not much information on it. And Trump has just remained quiet on it. Probably because, as we're about to talk about, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in his orbit that he'd rather gab about. On to our next part of the world. Greenland. Renewed talk of taking Greenland. If you'll recall from when Trump first became president, we had our eyes on Canada and then Venezuela and now Greenland. And what's important to remember is that this renewed talk about Greenland came right on the heels of Maduro being captured. Like, it was like Maduro captured on the 3rd, January 4th, we're taking Greenland. And this was right before Davos in Switzerland, where all the rich people meet to talk about the economy and fly their private jets, whatever. World leaders go there. Who knows? Who knows what's going on there? This led to a whole bunch of articles kind of dissecting about, is Greenland going to be the next Panama, and how we invaded Panama in the mid 20th century and how that didn't freaking work. And this caused all of our friends, all of the countries that should be our friends, this caused all of them to be mad at us because, duh, the people of Greenland even had a protest saying, stay out, understandably so. And Trump was seeming to be super serious about it. And this is, again, where another viral video of mine came from, because what I always hear when Trump says crazy, outlandish stuff like this is Republicans will be like, not Republicans, MAGAs will be like, he's just trolling. He's just trolling. And he got you guys. Seed libs keep falling for it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but I like my president to be a little bit serious. I want him to have respect for the office. And that's what this kind of turned out to be. So Trump starts saying he's taking Greenland. I'm taking Greenland. It's going to be under U.S. control, blah, 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 blah. And it was, in my opinion, about the minerals. We have one army base there, I believe. And whatever. Trump wants access to the Arctic. He was framing it as like, if we don't have it, then China or Russia is going to have it. Which is crazy to me because if he's seeing the reaction of especially the EU to him saying that he wants Greenland, what does he think the reaction would be to China or Russia saying they want to take Greenland? And the Arctic is, I learned about this a bit in my master's program, and I thought it was so stupid when somebody decided to write their paper about the race in the Arctic, and I was like, who gives a shit? Joke's on me. Egg on my face now, because this now seems to be a hot button issue. So there is legitimate reason to want to establish dominance in the Arctic, but I don't believe that it is achieved by taking Greenland. Not to mention, we have an army base there. Like, you use that as leverage, operate out of that army. Like, what are we doing? It is also important to note that Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark, kind of like in the same way that like Puerto Rico is to the US, not exactly, but like similar. So Donald Trump trying to just say like, oh, we're going to take it over, and then kind of saying like, oh, well, they can vote on it. Obviously people really don't want it. Like, this is giving when Putin invaded Crimea and had them all vote. That was not a real election. Be serious. Be serious. That is what Donald Trump wanted to do. And it took a minute for, again, because Donald Trump has spent the last year being like, we're taking the Panama Canal back. We're taking Venezuela. Canada's going to be the 51st state. At first, I don't think a lot of leaders took it seriously. And then all of a sudden, France and Denmark and a couple other EU countries were deploying troops to Greenland to do like practice military exercises, which are essentially just like a dick measuring contest, to be quite frank with you, where they just show their power and are like, hey, US, don't come over here. We don't want to be friends with you. So that was all in the run up to Davos. I feel like I'm just telling like a story at this point because all of these things are connected to each other. So at Davos, Trump gives a speech where he's like railing and saying, we're going to take Greenland, whatever, among other things in that speech. It was a hot mess of a speech. I was about to say, I recommend you go watch it, but I really don't. Like, it wasn't a productive speech unless you want to see how far his mental health has declined and like brain power has declined. That might be a good reason to watch it. But beyond that, I don't think it's really a great watch for understanding anything. But while at Davos, Trump and the Danish prime minister start gabbing. The Danish prime minister essentially says, you can have exactly what you've had since the 1950s. And then Trump goes to Truth Social and is like, we've done it. I've steamrolled them. I've won everything I've wanted. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. Nothing changed at all. Trump had all these big demands and I think got dog walked by the Danish prime minister because the Danish prime minister was more familiar with the actual policy in place between the US and Denmark with their bases in Greenland. So Trump's claiming it as a victory, as he always does. We've seen him. 9 wars ended. Yeah, same deal here. I don't mean to like make complete light of this though, because we still have 3 years to go of Trump. And I think downplaying this isn't the right move because this is how we got ourselves into World War II and also kind of World War I, is by downplaying people that said they wanted to take over countries, parts of countries, whatever it may be. So I don't want to downplay it. But for right now, crisis averted. But I believe that this move by Trump has very much fractured, one, NATO, and two, any relationship really that we have with another democratic country. We are clearly not headed down the right path, and it's going to take time to fix it. It'll take the midterms. It'll probably even take 2028 and maybe 2030 to really course correct on this. But from the perspective of our allies, our friends, our NATO allies especially, they are learning that they cannot rely on the US when there is the off chance that now every other year since 2016, we've elected a nutcase into power, that stability that we built up until 2016 and tried to regain that trust between 2020 and 2024 can just be completely shattered by a moron, quite frankly. And that's not good, because we need the Europe as our friends. We need other countries as our friends. We don't want to move closer to China. We shouldn't want to move closer to Russia. And Trump seems to be just like throwing that in the bucket. And I can't even really, like, my degree is literally in like international decision making. And I can't even fit what Trump is doing into an already created theory, which is really what troubles me. Like, he's isolationist, but also not really isolationist. He wants to be buddy-buddy with Putin and not China, but he's also not focusing on trying to form a good competition between China. Like, we've completely neglected Africa and South America. Now China's making strides there, and Trump seems to not care as much about that, except for taking over Venezuela. It's hard to dissect, but I'm going off on a tangent. But all that to say that this shouldn't be dismissed, but for right now, everything is okay. Oh, and as part of Davos, Trump had called for his peace board, in which he was selling seats for $1 billion, and then France, Emmanuel Macron was like, we're actually all good. And then Trump uninvited the Canadian Prime Minister, and also, weird part, although I shouldn't even say weird, because Trump has made billions of dollars off of his presidency at this point. Trump, in his founding document of this peace board, it says that Donald Trump is the head person. It does not say the president of the United States is the head person. It says Donald Trump is the head person. Meaning, for anybody that's got audio processing issues, such as myself, meaning when Trump leaves office, he will still be the head of this peace board that he's created. This is not a government entity. This is a personal peace board that he has now created for world leaders to pay him $1 bajillion and sit on it. You want to know who's accepted? All the countries that we don't traditionally like to hang out with. So that's cool. That also came out of Davos, I guess. Let's move closer to home. So as I'm sure everybody at this point has heard on the news, federal immigration and enforcement sparked one of the biggest protest waves around ICE in recent memory. These ICE demonstrations erupted at 2 points. So first, Rene, Nicole Good, was shot in her car fleeing an ICE agent. And her wife was there. Her dog was in the car. She was shot, I believe the report said 4 times. Initially, people thought it might have been 3. It turns out the report says 4. And that was that. I remember the day that Rene was murdered. And I was sitting at my desk at work, and I don't think I worked for an hour and a half, because all I wanted to do was understand what the hell was going on. I felt so sick to my stomach seeing the video, seeing the aftermath of what had happened, and the way that Kristi Noem in her big ass cowboy hat stood in front of cameras and just lied. Straight up lied. Called Rene Good an agitator, called her anything but the victim that she actually was. And the debate that really came out of this was more around the fact that she was in a car. And I'm not on the side of the ICE agents. I'm not on the side of people that are saying this, but I understand the thought process of like, oh, well, she was in a car. Like she had the bigger, quote unquote weapon. However, ICE agents and even police officers at your local police department are trained to, one, not stand in front of vehicles that could reasonably be assumed to be driven away. You're not supposed to stand in front of them. And two, you're not supposed to shoot into a moving vehicle because shooting into a moving vehicle does not stop the car. So even if she was in a car, he wasn't following his training. Even if she was trying to hit him, this ICE agent was not following his training. Period. Massive protests erupted after that. People were angry, pissed off. Minnesota got even more angry and pissed off, as they should. And not even 2 weeks later, I am sitting at home. It was a Saturday morning, and we get news that Alex Pretti has been shot and killed. Now, Alex Pretti had a gun on him. It was tucked in his waistband. He had the correct permits to be a person that was carrying. The way it looks from the video, I'm speaking about this as if everybody has seen the video, because at this point I feel like everybody has seen both videos. Like, you couldn't go more than 3 feet without seeing them. But if you haven't, feel free to look them up. Alex Pretti is trying to help a woman who is being shoved to the ground by ICE agents. They all tackle him. There's like 6 of them. He's on the ground. You hear one ICE agent say, "Gun." They disarm him, meaning they take the gun out of his waistband. And then he is shot 10 times and murdered. After he's lying motionless on the ground, you hear the ICE agents start to say, "Where's the weapon? Where's the gun?" Again, this is an issue about training. When there were 6 agents trying to tackle him. Like, there were too many hands in the cookie jar at that point to be effective. When one person yells gun, you're bound, and there's 6 people standing around, like there's bound to be one that like doesn't understand the situation and opens fire. Now, Alex Pretti was an ICU nurse at the VA, and this was really, I think, the straw that broke the camel's back. And that's not to say Rene Good was not a sympathetic victim, but it goes back to the old, kind of saying of, once is an accident, twice is intentional. And it's more time passed after Rene Good's, like, we found out more information about how after the ICE officer shot her and her car was crashed, he goes, "Fucking bitch." It's been horrible all around, and I think Alex Pretti was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I think at that point it really is, once is an accident, twice is a pattern. And I hate saying that because it in some ways kind of lessens Rene Good's murder. And I don't mean to do that. Both were horrible, tragic, should have never happened at all. But I think there was kind of a lull after the shooting of Rene Good, and as soon as things kind of felt like they were getting better and focus was now on how do we prosecute the people who murdered Rene Good, Alex Pretti is shot. After Alex Pretti was shot, the protests were just everywhere. There was one in Chicago, and I did talk to Adriano Kalin, who I had an episode with him. I think it came out on December 29th, I think. He's this local social justice photographer. He went up to Minneapolis, and when I spoke to him, he was talking about just the amount of people in Minnesota. And this was during that cold wave that we had. Like, here in Illinois and Chicago, it was like a high of -1. Minnesota is even more north than Chicago, in case you're not from the area. And it was like a high of -12. These people were out there in droves. And same with in Chicago last week, there was a big ice out protest. And it was snowing. Like, it was heavy snow. And Adriano was saying that there was probably like 5,000 to 6,000 people, which for a winter protest is a lot of people. And again, when I spoke to him, he was like, the one thing that gives me hope is the amount of people that are coming out in this weather. It's a lot to get people to leave their houses, as we've talked about. It's a lot to get people to take action. And if this is what he's seeing and we are seeing when it's wintertime, imagine what will happen when the sun starts shining again and the weather's good. And, the other thing that I hate having to talk about the discourse, but I think it's so important for people that aren't in right-wing spaces to understand what their kind of argument is. The argument has been, well, you didn't care when illegal immigrants murdered that girl from Georgia, or you didn't care when illegal immigrants killed this person, or when Charlie Kirk got killed. It's not understanding the difference between interpersonal violence and government-sanctioned violence. Interpersonal violence is the shooting of Charlie Kirk. Interpersonal violence is the murder of Lake and Riley. Both should not have happened, but that is interpersonal violence. Neither of those were committed by the government against its people. Rene Good and Alex Pretti were murdered by federal actors, federal agents, federal workers, whatever word you'd like to use. They were victims of state violence. And you cannot compare those two. You can compare Alex Pretti and Rene Good to the Kent State Massacre. That's a pretty apt comparison. And of course, Kristi Noem lied about Alex Pretti, per usual, calling him a bad actor. JD Vance just this week had an interview, and the reporter had asked him, "Are you going to apologize?" And JD Vance was like, "For what?" Dude, I don't know. Maybe the fact that you lied about him? Anyways, then a whole bunch of people started calling for Kristi Noem's impeachment. TBD on that. It seems to have lost steam. I don't really know what happened to that. But things are happening. There's even Republicans that have come out and said, like, Kristi Noem has got to go. At this point, though, I think it was earlier this week, it was announced that over 700 agents were being taken out of Minnesota, which is good, but there's still, about 1,500, 2,000 agents in Minnesota. For reference, when they came to Chicago and were wreaking havoc, there was only about 300 agents here. I cannot even imagine, and the Minneapolis is much smaller than Chicago. I cannot even imagine what 2,000 agents looks like in a city that small. It still has millions of people, but that small compared to Chicago. Like, I just can't. I can't. This also then sparked a whole, especially about Alex Pretti, sparked a whole debate about the Second Amendment, where Republicans were like, well, you shouldn't have brought a gun, as if they didn't bring guns and loaded weapons to rallies to try and intimidate people. Like, they were kind of insinuating if you bring a gun, you should expect to be shot. But then simultaneously, their own supporters were bringing guns and weapons to protest to intimidate people, but they weren't shot. So riddle me that. The whole Second Amendment debate has just flipped on its head at this point. So that's happening. Yeah, but all of this started also because this whole crackdown on Minneapolis started because that freak virgin boy made a video about Somali daycares. That is why all of this started. And I don't even have time to cover all of the egregious cases that have happened of citizens and people with legal status being detained and deported. There was one really interesting Substack article that I read. It's called Because I'm Black. I can't remember who wrote it, but I'll put it in the show notes. Very good read about somebody that was here with proper documentation and was put in a nice facility. And the way he tells the story, the only way he was able to get out of there is because he was able to speak English with no accent, and also because he had a great lawyer on standby. I'll put that in the show notes, but it is a very great read. But regardless, I don't have time to go into all of the cases, but there are just some egregious cases. We all heard the story about Liam Ramos, who is now back in his home, and he's not the only one. Like, there's so many people are being deported and put in these facilities, but they are here in the right way. They have the papers, they have the right documentation. But then, on to our next story. Because of how egregious these murders were and how egregious Kristi Noem was just lying, there was this new fight for the budget, and Democrats kind of decided that they were going to go after the DHS budget, which had ballooned in the old new budget bill. That makes sense. So there did end up being a partial government shutdown because there was disagreement about funding DHS. Democrats' arguments were essentially saying, like, we're not funding DHS if this is what you're going to do with the money. We're not funding DHS. If you are going to murder citizens, then you are not going to get funding. Like, their funding, I want to say, went like more than 50%, I think, went up. Like, that's crazy. So it only lasted, I think, like 2 or 3 days, but we did have a partial government shutdown, and now we don't have a government shutdown. There hasn't really been much news coverage about what the kind of new budget is, but they came to some sort of an agreement at some point, and now I guess we'll see what happens. And the other thing that came out of this was that Greg Bovino got demoted, so cheers to that little Nazi-looking freak that likes to walk around with his Gestapo jacket on in the cold. He's out. He got demoted, so Tom Homan is back in charge, and hopefully we never hear from Greg Bovino again, because he was all over Chicago, Evanston, Winnetka. He was all over the place here. So, you know what? I think I could go my whole life and never see his face again, and it would be too soon. So, let's hope he stays demoted. Fingers crossed. The last thing I wanted to touch on was the Epstein files. This, I believe we had covered in my last episode. I think like that first batch had come out right before I recorded my last solo episode back in like mid-December. So Congress had a deadline of, I believe, December 19th for these documents to come out. DOJ releases a few. I mean, it was like thousands and thousands, but like in the grand scheme of things, it was a few. And then they were like, keep in mind they had a month to like get this sorted. Then they were like, well, we can't release them in time because there's just too many and we need to redact them all and da-da-da-da-da. But like the bill that was passed said like no redactions. You can only redact victims' names. Whatever. So they had people working overtime to get these files redacted. And even though they didn't need to, all they needed to do was redact victims' names. Earlier this week, they finally released them. Victims' names are unredacted. Oh, and at first, that first rollout, they were bad redactors, to the point that my boss at my corporate job emailed us and was like, this is what happens when you have bad redacting, because we're working on a project that has to have like good redacting in it. And it's the fact that they would put redactions up, but then if you opened it like in Word and highlighted it, the redaction would go away. Hello? Have these people never redacted a thing in their life? What are you doing? So that was the issue at first. And then that persisted in this second go around. The other thing that happened in that first one is that there was a picture of Trump that got taken down. That seems to have happened again. At one point in their first drop, if you searched Trump's name, nothing came up, which was just untrue. And the other like weird stuff that came out of round 2 of the drop is that Elon Musk was in there after saying, I never went to Jeffrey Epstein's island. And in reality, he kept saying, like, first of all, I think this just goes to prove how like socially inept Elon is. And he's never said anything about having any sort of like diagnosis such as autism that would make him have some sort of social awkwardness. But it is very prevalent that something does not compute in his head the right way, because in his emails to Jeffrey Epstein, he would email Jeffrey Epstein and be like, let me come to the island. And then at a certain point, Jeffrey Epstein would forward it to Ghislaine Maxwell and be like, can you deal with this? Nobody likes Elon Musk, even Jeffrey Epstein. Anyways, Jesus, I'm losing my train of thought. Elon Musk would be like, let me come to the island. I need to hang out with girls. Girls, FTW. And then Jeffrey Epstein would be like, okay, like we'll coordinate, blah, blah, blah. Then I guess, I mean, it's not clear from the emails, but it seems as though Elon Musk never did actually make it to the island, but he was clearly asking Jeffrey Epstein to go to the island and indicating that he knew what these island parties were about. Then Jeffrey Epstein emails Elon Musk and is like, hello, UN General Assembly coming up, like come party in New York. And again, Elon has previously said, you know, I want to see the girls at the island. I want to party with girls and women. Jeffrey says, General Assembly's happening. Lots of interesting people is the direct quote. Elon Musk responds and is like, no thanks. I have 2 companies and I don't want to hang out with diplomats. And Jeffrey Epstein responds and is like, no, you idiot. It's girls. Like, Elon could not understand speaking in nuance if it hit him in the head, is what I take from these emails. So that's, like, to me, the craziest part. The other thing that happened, a professor from my master's program was named in the files. Although I was reading it and it seems to come from, like, a stream of consciousness, like, tip to, it doesn't say who it's sent to, and it doesn't say who it's from. The only from is, like, from Ken. So that was, like, a weird thing that, like, I know somebody that was mentioned in the Epstein files. Yeah, so I'm waiting to hear on that, because somewhere in the I went to American University for my master's degree. The American University paper had kind of broken the story, and people in the comments were saying, well, like, that email doesn't mean anything. Like, it was a, crazy guy who was ranting and raving to the FBI, da 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 da. And, like, American hasn't released a statement about it, so don't know really what to do with that. So I'm interested to see where that one goes. But it's very weird to think about the fact that somebody that I know was mentioned in the Epstein files. My friends from grad school were texting and sent the article, and I was like, it's now a bad time to ask him if he wants to do a podcast episode, or yeah. So that happened. So the Epstein files, I think, is done, ? I think they released everything that they had, although I'm sure they are suppressing a bunch of documents. So, like, do with that what you will. Kash Patel is saying there's nothing left to prosecute. Meanwhile, other countries are firing and getting rid of the people that are mentioned in the files. Prince Andrew has left the royal residences. Other CEOs have stepped down from their positions in other countries. Like, other countries are handling this the right way. And the US, Kash Patel is saying there's nothing left to prosecute. Sorry? Trump is also saying, I think people need to move on. I think people need to just move on. What do you mean? Trump, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? So do with that what you will. Trump is in the Epstein files. I think he is an evil and sick man that was friends with Jeffrey Epstein while Jeffrey Epstein was doing the pedophiling. And you know what they say, birds of a feather. So do with it what you will. I do hope that when there is a friendlier administration in charge, that they do a re-release and maybe don't redact Trump's name, because that appears to be what happens. There were also some very nasty kind of accusations made against Trump, but, like, that's where I'm like, I don't understand I don't understand the context, and I don't feel like I have the time to try and dive into the 3 million documents that they released, because I'm sure a lot of these require context, because these 3 million documents, yes, there are emails from Jeffrey Epstein, but there are also, like, FBI tips that are the ranting and raving of a crazy person, or they're tips that mention Epstein and so therefore are included in the discovery process, but, like, do not actually have anything to do. And, at the end of the day, all these documents showed is that, like, do you remember QAnon? Remember the whole, like, pizza thing? That was a thing in Jeffrey Epstein's email. Pizza was great tonight, blah, blah, blah. The tinfoil hats, the QAnon people, the crazy child predators shooting up the DC pizza place, they were right. They just weren't looking in the right place, because the people who are in these documents are people in Trump's administration, also international people like Elon Musk, and, they were right about everything except who was in those files. So the other thing is that Bill Clinton has decided, I can't remember, is it Bill or Bill and Hillary? The Clintons, a Clinton, has decided to testify to Congress because Bill was about to be held, like, in contempt. So he's going to testify in front of Congress. And, I think he played it smart. I think he was waiting to see what would happen. Some of the chatter that came out about him was that he was traveling with Epstein as part of a mission trip to Africa, which, I'm not saying Bill Clinton is this, like, perfect gem that, like, we should believe every word he says, but, like, the one weird thing about the pictures so in the first drop was all the pictures of Bill Clinton coming out. And again, like the lack of context is what matters, because there's a bunch of pictures and Bill Clinton's kind of all wearing the same outfit. And they're like, look at all these pictures of Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein, da-da-da. But like the context would be that he's wearing the same outfit, and it should be implied that like these were all taken within a couple days of each other. So I don't know. If it comes out that Bill Clinton is like a nasty, disgusting child rapist, so be it. I guess I shall throw away my Bill Clinton hat and my Bill Clinton coffee mug, and that'll be that. But like, that's the one thing I don't like about this Epstein Files thing, is that it lacks context, especially when they're releasing completely redacted files that aren't allowing people to get the context that is needed to make an accurate judgment. So that's all I have to say on that. All that to say, the broader theme of January is just escalating tension everywhere, globally, domestically. Like, the water is boiling and it is about to boil over. And I don't say that lightly. We are seeing international law tested by extraterritorial action, domestic institutions that are strained, and also state-sanctioned violence, lest we forget. And also just accountability is deferred, which is like not helping us. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but that's just the overarching theme. And it's sad. I feel worried. I was so excited to sit down for this episode because I needed to gab about it somewhere. Like, it worries me though that like this, we're a year into Trump's presidency, and I feel like the entire Earth and the United States is crumbling underneath the pressure. That's not to say, like, I do still find hope, especially, as I was saying, Adriano said, there's 6,000 people protesting in Chicago in the dead of winter when there's a big snowstorm. That gives me hope, because I believe, there's another No King's Day coming up in March. I think March 28th is the day, I believe. And I'm super eager to see what happens on that day. Obviously, I will be protesting. I will be out there. And I hope everybody else is too. But I believe that is all that I have for you guys. Next week, we will have another Illinois candidate, another Illinois 9 candidate. And then after that, there is one more Illinois for a state house seat. One more Illinois candidate coming on the day before Election Day. Really cutting it to the wire, I was. And then that's kind of it. There's a couple more election ones for Houston. I got a guy from Pennsylvania. I got a guy from Massachusetts. And then I'm hoping to be out of the primary chaos and maybe bring some of the people that have won their primaries back on, or people that have lost, to talk about, what that looks like. What do you do after you run for office and don't succeed? Like, what happens? So we'll see. Oh, and I have an article coming out on Substack and on February 17th. I will link my Substack in the show notes per usual. But yeah, that's it. Hopefully the next 2 weeks are better, and hopefully in 2 weeks I can do a little bit more in-depth about news stories, because it is always a little weird to come back after candidate month episodes, because I feel like I'm rushing to get everything I feel like I have to fit all the big pieces in, and because of that I miss so much of the little pieces. But then I'm talking about the big pieces and I'm like, oh yeah, and then this happened off that big piece. So we'll see. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. To support this podcast, you can also subscribe to my Substack, She Knows the Score, which is linked in the show notes. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. But seriously though, follow me on social media, because that's where you get all the content that doesn't make it to the podcast. Anyways, keep asking questions, stay engaged, and don't forget to protest. I will see you guys next week.